I somehow think that once he was elected, then they take him in the back room and they tell him the real deal.
Yeah,
I don't know if that happens or not, but it seems to me it's like an awful lot of the Clintonites got positions of power, and you mentioned the economic team. The first thing that got me really bent out of shape was the way we handled Honduras. He took a wonderful position early on. Yeah. Everyone in Latin America was happy, and then they just slid backwards.
That's right.
And there was talk about a big Clinton friend advisor who was tied into the policy down there in a negative way. I actually talked to our Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, a friend and someone I admire a lot, and she just said she felt they were so overwhelmed with stuff going on that they weren't able to pay attention to that. I don't know if that's true.
Well, regardless, it was an opportunity lost because here you had a president who actually was advocating nonviolent resistance against a dictatorial regime that had assumed power illegally. And the Obama administration basically backed down. They could have had an opportunity to say, we stand for democracy and freedom, and therefore we support the legitimately elected president, and we are going to cut off all aid to Haiti to Honduras until this situation gets resolved. That wasn't done. Again, the power of big business trumps the power of democracy. It happens every time. We should have learned this from the 1930s. And I think it still goes on. Let me just say one thing, Michael, because there's one analogy that many people try to make, which is the connection between Obama and FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And what's interesting to me and what really gets my spine up is, in many ways, the American people are more progressive than media representations make you think they are. They're not as stupid. They're not as stupid as people think. They're smart. For the most part, they're educated, even if not formally educated. And there's only a small portion of these people that capture the media attention that tend to be the ones that we used to call the know-nothings back in the 1800s. However, most people tend to be progressive. They want single-payer health care. They want decent work conditions. They want stability. Obama has not reached out to those people. He has not made the effort to do a popular mobilization in the way that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, with his chat-side fireplace talks, was able to bring people together and actually oppose the banking system, to actually call the bankers to task, not in a limp way, but in a very strong manner to push his agenda. And that's part of the problem here, is Obama has not been forceful in pushing a progressive agenda either on health care or on financial reform or on dealing with the issue of the workplace, many of these issues. And that's why people are upset and they're frustrated, because here is a person that was supposedly elected by the masses who is in fact backing down in the face of capital. Not surprising, but in the absence of a popular movement that supports him, this is going to continue. I don't see this as changing.
Two things off the top of my head. One, a friend of mine, Bernadine Dorn, who's been a guest on this show, she and I were talking long before he became the president, and she said he's a good guy, but he's not a leftist.
That's right.
And he's clearly moved further to the center.
Right.
And the other thing, though, that the theme that I've put out there from early on was when I heard him give, I think it was in Wisconsin, in Madison, when he gave a talk during the campaign. He said, "I cannot do it alone."
That's right.
And I've been pushing all along. It's really up to the progressive movement in all its disparate elements to push him from the bottom up.
And this is difficult, Michael. I mean, look, we know this. I knew when he was elected that he was not a progressive. We all knew that. He was a good guy.
We figured it would give us more room to move.
But he was a corporate centrist. There's no doubt about that. I mean, he went to Harvard. He taught at the law school. So it's clear that his education, his training, all of that presupposed a corporate type of approach. That being said, the problem of mobilizing from the bottom is a serious one, because one of the things I often tell my students is you have two things going on in this country that are problematic. The first is the decline of labor unions from 35% of the workforce in the 1950s to less than 12% of the workforce now.
Is that turning or no?
It's turning in certain sectors, especially the service sector. I know I have one of my former students is actually working in Ohio with developing workers' cooperatives, and they're actually doing some really interesting work. We're going to have her speak on campus in March about the development of the worker cooperative movement. And there's a lot of small-scale experiments here and there, but for the most part, the labor movement has been moribund in many directions, except for the occasional forays like the protest at Republic Windows and Doors last year that was where they seized the factory. Things like that give me hope that there may be a movement. But aside from the labor movement, you also have to have a way to integrate the labor movement with the student movement, with unemployed people across the board. And so far, this has been quite fragmented. And there's been and I guess part of my interest in this is asking, what are the stories that we tell that allow people to come together that have diverse interests like this, but have common class interests? How do we tell a story? If you look at, for example, a movie like Avatar with James Cameron that tells a very complicated story, but one that's very typical for American audiences, he's a storyteller. He knows how to get into the emotional structures of people to give it across. People like George Lakoff, the cognitive linguist, knows if you don't tell the story, nobody is going to know what to invest their feelings in. The right wing has been very good at telling a very strong narrative story about victimization, nationalism, xenophobia, hatred of immigrants. Where's the left story on this that combines these diverse interests from environmentalists and sustainability to the labor movement to workers' rights to immigrants? Where is that vision? That's what's missing right now. It's the common vision that can unite people together into a movement. Back in the 60s, we had the SDS that attempted to try to do this, right, with a Port Huron statement. Very little of that's
close to my heart.
Really, very little of that seems to be happening at the moment. It doesn't mean it won't, but at the moment, there's a lot of turmoil and ferment, but not a whole lot of crystallization.
Talmadge Wright, we only have a couple minutes left. I'm just going to ask you if you were the guy who brought the information from the Central Committee meeting, what would you say needs to happen in 2 minutes?
Boy, that's a tough one in 2 minutes.
That's why I asked
yeah, I think one of the things that has to happen is that people have to get off their computers and take to the streets. I really do think it's that simple. It's not complicated. I mean, I'm not saying that one should be anti-technology by no means, but it means you have groups like MoveOn.org and other groups that are bloggers. That is only a means to an end.
It's just information.
It's just information. You have to do with that information. You have to engage in physical activity. You have to develop civic organizations and street protests in order to mobilize populations. If you don't do that, you're just speaking basically to other people who think like you do.
I've wondered why around the whole healthcare thing we didn't have a massive march.
Exactly.
Downtown on the Federal Building here, or down in D.C.
Exactly.
It's sort of timid, and you have some of the more. I'm not putting anyone out there as sectarian, but you have like a demonstration coming up in March in Washington D.C. against the wars, but I don't see that as really a mass mobilization.
No, you had this pretty much with the alternative globalization movement, the sense of militancy around multinationals and globalized capital. But that has been pretty much controlled and siphoned off by police and military. And I think that what has to happen is not just simply writing letters. There has to be organizations created where people feel a sense of community that they can get involved. If you look at, for example, the resistance to the Iraq War that happened before Bush went in, we had millions of people in the street to oppose that war. We should be having millions of the people in the street for health care and the Fortis crisis.
That left a dent. I think people felt like we turned them out, and what did we get? And you had Daley busting people here, and then now he's saying we shouldn't be in the war.
And that's why I think the important thing here is to leave people with is you have to leave them with a narrative that gives a sense of hope, a sense of possibility that things can be different. Obama is not going to do that. It has to come from the people.